For decades, this tiny piece of code has basically run the internet's ad economy. But now, that engine is sputtering to a halt. So we're going to dive into what's supposed to replace it and uncover why the reality, well, it's a whole lot messier than the promise.
Yeah, I'm talking about third-party cookies. These little digital breadcrumbs have been following us everywhere, building these crazy detailed profiles of what we like, what we do, our entire online lives, all just to serve us that perfect ad.
But people have had enough. Thanks to this huge global push for privacy and regulations like GDPR, browsers are finally putting a stop to it. And Google's Chrome, which was kind of the last big holdout, has finally signaled the end. The cookie is officially crumbling.
And that is the billion-dollar question, right? Google's been pouring years into building a replacement, a brand new system they say is designed for a privacy-first web. But, as some researchers found out, the new boss might just be a little too similar to the old one.
Okay, so what is this grand solution from Google? It's a huge part of what they're calling the privacy sandbox, and the star of the show is something called the Topics API.
The whole idea here is pretty cool, actually. It's meant to stop those trackers from shadowing your every move. Instead, your browser, it becomes kind of like a privacy-conscious librarian. It sees all the books you're checking out online, the sites you visit. But when an advertiser comes knocking, it doesn't spill the beans on every single title. Nope, it just shares the general genres you're into.
And this is how it's all supposed to work in theory. First, your browser keeps an eye on your activity, but it does it all locally, right there on your device. Then, every week, it crunches the numbers and figures out your top 5 interests or topics. Finally, when a site wants to show you an ad, your browser just serves up 3 of those topics, picked at random from the last 3 weeks. See? It's designed to be general, a little fuzzy, and totally private. Or at least that's the plan.
But what happens when you take this neat, tidy theory from the lab and release it into the wild, chaotic jungle of the actual internet? Well, that's exactly what a team of researchers from Politecnico di Torino and Università degli Studi di Trieste set out to discover. They crawled tens of thousands of websites to see how this Topics API is really being used.
And right off the bat, they found something huge. This isn't some tiny little experiment happening in a corner of the web. You are likely running into the Topics API on about 1 out of every 4 websites you visit. It is already out there and it's running at a massive scale.
Okay, but this is where it gets really interesting. If you look at Google's own ad network, DoubleClick, even they are only using the Topics API on about 1/3 of the sites where they could be. What does that tell you? It screams that they're running massive A/B tests. They're pitting the new system against the old cookies, trying to figure out if this new privacy-friendly approach can actually still make them money.
So, okay, slow adoption and testing, that's one thing. But the researchers also stumbled upon something a bit more worrying. A fundamental bug, a real glitch in how the whole system was put together. And this really breaks it down perfectly. On the left, you see how it's supposed to work. There's a security guard at the gate, and only pre-approved advertisers are allowed to ask for your topics. Simple enough. But on the right, that's the reality. It turns out if a specific settings file in the browser is missing or just gets corrupted, the system's default setting is to just leave the gate wide open. Anyone can walk right up and ask.
So who's leaving this gate unlocked? Well, overwhelmingly, it's the website you're actually visiting. The researchers figured out that this is often because of really common tools like Google Tag Manager. If they're not set up just right, they end up asking for your topics on behalf of the website, totally bypassing the security rules and creating this messy, unauthorized free-for-all.
Look, glitches happen. But the next thing the researchers found looks a lot less like an accident and more like a deliberate choice. A choice that goes right to the heart of user consent.
You know the drill. We've all done this a million times. You click a link, a new page starts loading up.
And boom, there it is. That consent banner pops up, asking you to accept all. This is supposed to be the moment you're in control, right? The moment you get to decide?
But what if that's all just for show? What if in that tiny fraction of a second before you even saw that banner, the deal was already done? What if your data, your browsing interests, had already been handed over?
Because that's exactly what the researchers found. A whopping 28 approved ad companies were grabbing your topics before you ever had a chance to say yes or no. I mean, look at the top of the list, Yandex.com, with over 600 violations. This means your interests are being shared without your permission, plain and simple. And what's really telling is that Google's own DoubleClick had 0 violations. It proves it's possible to wait for consent. Some companies are just choosing not to.
So let's recap. We've got buggy implementations,
We've got big players who seem hesitant to even use it, and we have a serious problem with respecting user consent. So what does the future of this new system even look like?
Yeah, this timeline really says it all. You see that initial burst of activity in mid-2024? That's everyone experimenting. But then, adoption completely flatlines. Some of the early adopters, like Outbrain, even started using it less. It's like the gold rush to this new cookieless web just hit a wall.
The researchers really hit the nail on the head, calling the mood around this whole thing cynical resignation, especially since Google themselves keeps pushing back the final death of the cookie. There's this growing fear that this whole grand project for a more private web might be getting quietly swept under the rug, leaving us with the problems of both the old system and the new one.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The whole point of the Topics API was to solve the privacy nightmare of the third-party cookie. But when you look at the messy, complicated, and often non-consensual reality of how it's being used, you have to wonder, are we actually fixing the internet, or are we just inventing new, more complicated ways to break it?